Everybody. So we're going to be walking through the macOS Installfest now. So there's some prereqs here. We're not going to walk through these, but basically you need to have an Apple ID, which you probably have if you already have a MacBook. We want you to have a GitHub account already and go into System Settings, General, Software Update, and just make sure that if your operating system needs any basic updates, you do those before you do these steps. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is installing a terminal. You actually have a terminal by default on any version of macOS. So if I open Spotlight here, I'm going to start typing terminal. And you'll see there's a built-in app called Terminal here. This is what it looks like. If I do Command plus or minus, I can make it bigger or smaller. I'm going to close this though. And as you see here, we linked to something called iTerm2. So I'm going to click on that. This is what iTerm2 looks like. You can download it just like any other app and then, pin it to your dock. And that's what I use mostly. I don't really have a strong reason for it, just what I'm used to. So this is iTerm2. Let me just pin it to the dock. And same deal, I can do Command plus or minus to make it bigger or smaller. And I'm at the home directory. So let me go back to the docs we're doing here. Okay, so we're just looking at our docs here now. So we have our terminal ready, and the next thing is this thing called oh-my-zh shell. So there's different kinds of shells that a terminal can run. If you're on Linux or Windows with WSL, your default is bash. And if you're on a Mac, a modern Mac, the default is this thing called zshell. They're more or less very similar, but some small things are different. Like for example, there's going to be a file called .zshrc, which will customize certain aspects of the shell for you. So first thing we're going to do is install zshell. So I'm going to copy this over here, or actually you're going to be able to, but I need to update this. This $sign here is just to say that's the beginning of the command, but we don't actually want to copy that $sign. So I'm going to copy it like this. And I'll put it in here. When I hit enter, this should download oh-my-zh shell. So I'm seeing this because I already have it downloaded. So I'm just going to ignore it. But for you, you should see some steps to run through. It might ask you some questions. And when it's done, what you should do is close your terminal. So I'm using Command Q here. And then I'm going to reopen the terminal. And zshell should be running. And you're not on regular terminal. You're not on regular zshell, but oh-my-zh shell if you have like color in your terminal now. And if I type ls-a here, that's going to show me all the files here, including the hidden files. And you'll notice there's one called .zshrc here. So maybe first I'll download Visual Studio Code and then we'll open that up and look at it because we are going to need that later. Okay, so going back to our walkthrough, the next thing we want to do is download Visual Studio Code. So I can go here and I can click Mac here. And after a second, it should download it. And then when it's done, I would move it into my applications folder like you do for any Mac app.
A few moments later.
Okay, so this is what Visual Studio Code looks like. And if we follow the rest of our document, the thing we'll see is that we want to open the command prompt with Command-Shift-P. And then we just want to start typing shell command. So let's see that. Just move this over here. So I'm going to do Command-Shift-P. It's going to open this right here. And I want to start typing shell command. And there's these different commands here. So install code command and path is what's going to allow us to open Visual Studio Code from the command line, which will be useful. So I click that and it says it's been done. So I can close Visual Studio Code and I'm going to reopen my terminal. And now for my terminal, if I type code, that's an actual command it knows and it will open Visual Studio Code. Okay, so we have Visual Studio Code installed. The next thing we want to do is figure out package management. So if you ever use like the App Store or the Windows Store or something like that, that's basically a place where you can, that's sort of built into your computer, a program you're given automatically that lets you download other programs. Because the alternative would be going to some website and getting some link and downloading it that way. So Homebrew is that for command line stuff. So this first line I'm going to copy paste here is going to grab something directly from a site, this site here, but it's going to install a tool that's going to let me install future things without having to know the URL necessarily. Okay, so I'm going to go here and I'm going to copy paste that. So we don't really need to know what this does, but it will go to some URL, get a file, download it, and then run it. And it wants my password, so I'll give that. It's telling me it's going to install some things. There's a good chance if your computer is relatively new or you haven't done much programming on it, it's going to ask you to install the Xcode command line tools. That's necessary for doing any kind of development work on a Mac, and it takes a fair amount of time to download, so be patient with that. I have it downloaded already, so all this is doing is downloading the Homebrew program itself, which I believe is still going to take a fair amount of time, so we're probably going to... Oh, no, there we go. It happened. I was going to stop the video and restart, but no, it happened. So what I'm going to do now, because I just downloaded a new thing and it was added to the path, is I'm going to close my terminal entirely and then reopen it. And when I do that, it should now know about the new thing. So if I type brew, what happens? See, it actually shows me something. So if I type like, something random, it's going to say command not found. The fact that when I typed brew, it shows me some more details means that I didn't call it in a meaningful way, but it knows about brew. It's a real program it knows about. And the first thing we're going to do is run brew update. So the point of brew update is that brew essentially has a list of packages that you can download, but it can't download them unless it knows about them. And what brew update is going to do is going to grab a list from some central server that brew has, which basically is just a list of all the currently available packages, so you could search for them and get the up-to-date versions. So let's do that now. It says already up to date because I've done this before. It's also not a bad idea to run brew doctor. So if I run brew doctor, it's going to tell me if there's any issues with my brew that might affect things, downloading correctly. And you can sometimes do those things, sometimes not. Mine are so small that maybe I will do it. But usually you just want to wait until you run into problems, but it is telling me exactly what's wrong. So I could do that. And then right after I can run brew cleanup, and that is apparently going to do something as well. And now if I, I'm pressing up and down on my keyboard now, and that's giving me older commands on my command line. That's a useful thing. So if I run brew doctor again, it's going to tell me everything's good now, hopefully. And that's a good state to start in. Good. So yeah, that was the step here, running brew doctor. Great. So brew is ready. And but still, it's a good opportunity to now run this where we actually look at this file zshrc. So I'm going to go back here and type ls-a. You'll see that I actually do have this file called zshrc here. It's with a dot in front, which means it's hidden by default. So when I type ls, you don't see it. But I can use Visual Studio Code to open that file anyways. So that file is zshrc. And this is that file. So this file basically specifies how our Z shell works. And one of the first things we see here is we're exporting this variable called path. And you're not supposed to understand this language very well. This is called bash script or shell script. And I barely know it myself, and we certainly don't expect you to know it or learn it, but you need to know a little bit to mess with this stuff. So basically, we're exporting a variable called path here, and what it is going to be equal to is the existing path variable plus this additional directory user local bin. And we can see there's other stuff down there. So if I look back at these instructions, I'll see that it is asking that we have user local bin on our path. And we actually already have that seemingly. So if you don't have that there, add it. Otherwise, that's exactly what it should be. So I'm going to close this. And what's being mentioned here is that if you want to reset your, if you made changes to your zshrc and you want to apply them to the current terminal, this is the command that does that. The alternative is you simply close the terminal and reopen it. That's definitely the more common way. Cool. So now we actually want to install a few programs, and we're going to use brew to do that. So let me open this back up. And the first program we want to get is Python 3. So there's this built-in program called which we can use. So if I say which Python 3, that's actually telling me there's already a version of Python 3 on my computer at /user/local/bin/python 3. So a lot of things do come built into your computer at this point, but just to be careful, we're going to install everything we can with brew, and then it'll be in a special place brew knows about. So we're going to type brew install and just Python, I suppose. So just brew install Python. And we'll wait a moment. So what's happening right now is that when we are trying to install Python, it's telling us relies on a few other programs. Those are its dependencies. And so it has to download those dependencies first. And of course, those dependencies might have their own dependencies. And then when it's all done, it's going to put it all together. And we should have a version of Python 3 that works.
A few moments later.
Okay, so that is done now. And again, I should be able to type which Python 3, and it knows about it. So I don't know if anything I did really mattered there, but just in case you don't have it on your computer, that's how you would get it. And of course, I can type Python 3 now, and you'll see that it actually does have Python 3 here. So I can type 1+1, and that works, and then I can exit out of it. I typed Control-D there to exit out of it. There are other ways. Worst case scenario, you just close your terminal and reopen it. So we installed Python. And now the next thing we're going to do is this command here, Python 3 -m ensure pip. So this is going to ensure that we have something called pip already, and it looks like I have it already, but if you didn't, it would install it. And just like brew is a package manager for your command line environment, pip is a package manager for Python. So if you're trying to get a specific Python library that you want to work with, pip is how you would do it. So we're going to see if this works by typing pip3. And the fact that we're seeing anything and not just command not found means that we do have pip3 on there. And of course, we could type which pip3, and that would tell us exactly where it is. Okay, so the next thing is the Python virtual environment. So Python virtual environments are this thing where given a certain project, you might need to download files or have certain versions of things, and you wouldn't want that to conflict with another project. So you need to have a virtual environment. And I like to create a general virtual environment for just the default. So that's not exactly what we have in the instructions here, but I'm going to do that. Which is, I'll look right here and then I'll copy paste this. And I'm actually going to call this default because I want this to be the default environment. That's going to create a new virtual environment. And if we do ls, we'll see we actually have this file called default here now. So what I should be able to do now is actually run this activate file. So I could type source and then default / and tab will autocomplete stuff for you. So default /bin /activate. And if I do that, you'll see it now says default on the side here. That's because we're in our default Python virtual environment. But notice that if I exit terminal and I reopen it, that is not true anymore. We're not seeing that default. And we'll deal with that in a moment. So the next thing I'm going to do is install some other stuff. So the first thing I'll do is install node. So the way we're going to do that is first do brew install npm. So just like pip was the package manager for Python, npm is the package manager for Node and gets JavaScript related packages. So we're installing npm first. It appears to be installing Node for us as well. I'm not too worried about these warnings. Maybe I should be. But the next thing we're going to do is this line here. So we downloaded this thing called npm, and that's going to let us download a specific program called n. So if I were to read this, sudo says like this is because we need a password. We're calling npm. We're doing the subcommand install. -g is a flag, which means global, which means this is not going to be installed for a specific folder, but for the whole file system. And then n is actually the name of the program we're downloading. So n is going to be like a Node version manager. It's going to allow us to download and install the version of Node that we want. So the next thing we're going to do is actually run that n thing. So I'm going to do sudo n stable, and that's going to give me the latest stable version of Node. Great, so now if I type which node, something should come up, and if I type node, we'll see we're on a version of Node, and it works as expected. Okay, that's Node. Now what about Git? So Git you probably already have on your system as well, so if I start typing Git, it looks like it's there. But just to be safe, let's install it. And if it's already there, it'll not actually install it. It'll just say, hey, I have that. But you know, this is actually saying, hey, it was outdated, so I'm going to upgrade it. Great, so it looks like we have an upgraded version of Git now. And then we're going to do some of these things to give some sensible defaults to Git. So here I'm going to set a global name to my name, just because when Git does things on your behalf, you want to just have it automatically set up so it knows like some basic information about you if it needs to link it to you. So here I'll use my code Platoon email. And there's one last one here, which we're saying we're going to choose a specific editor. Otherwise, the editor would be Vim, and that's kind of annoying. So we'll choose Visual Studio Code. And then we can type this file here at the end, git config -s global -l, and that's just going to tell us that information so we can see that it's accurate. Great. So now that we have GitHub installed, now that we have Git installed, what I can do is I can go to GitHub and I can look for a specific library. So I'm going to look for the library lodash, which is just a specific JavaScript library. I can go here, and you'll see that there's this big green button here called code. So if your window is not big enough, you might not see it, as you can see. So you want to make sure your window is big enough that you could see that button, and you click it, and it's going to give you some options. So the first option we're going to look at is HTTPS, and we're going to do copy right here. And then what that's going to allow me to do is that I can go here and let's say I want to do this in source. I'm going to say git clone and then paste that link. And what it's going to do is it's going to copy that entire repository from GitHub onto my local computer. So that might take a minute, as you see.
A few moments later.
Great. So now I'm going to type ls, and you'll see we actually have this folder called lodash, and there's all sorts of stuff in it. And you can even see that my terminal is telling me a little bit about Git because it knows about it. So I'm going to go up and go out, and that's just to demonstrate that we can do that. So I'm going to get rid of it now. But something else I wanted to show you is that there's this thing here, GitHub CLI. So if I click that, you'll see there's a different command here. And HTTPS is definitely the norm, but sometimes you have authentication issues where you have to be a specific person to actually clone something. It's not just public for everybody. And in those cases, being authenticated through this GitHub command line tool called GH is usually a little more convenient. So let's download that tool. We can download it with brew. So I'm going to go here, type brew install GH. So now we're downloading, just another piece of software for the command line. Great. And now the next thing we want to do is type gh auth login. So this is going to set things up so that we actually, we're going to have some choices here, and we're going to authenticate ourselves with GitHub. So I'm going to choose regular GitHub. I'll choose HTTPS. I'll say yes, I will authenticate with credentials and then log in with a web browser. It's going to want me to copy paste this code, so I'll copy it. I'll hit enter, and it opens the web browser. So I paste that in there, hit OK, hit authorize. And it's saying I'm all good, so I can close this. Now I'll go back here, and it finished up on this end too, because now it understands who I am. So what I can do now is I can copy paste this command, gh repo clone low dash, and that's going to do the same thing that the other one did. It just will work a little better in situations where the repository is private and you may or may not have access to it unless you are authenticated with GitHub. Okay, this instruction here is just if it does finish and you want to delete it, this is how you would do it. So aliases, finally. So what we're going to do now is open up that zshrc file. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to go up one level because it's actually at the root level. So if I do ls-a, you'll see that's exactly where it is. So I can always do it. I can do .zshrc because that's where I am. But I could always give it a full path. So in this case, I would say my home folder /.zshrc, and tab is your friend here for auto-completing. So now we're going to open that file in Visual Studio Code, and you'll see if you did the oh-my-zh shell part, there's some defaults already given. You can really fall down the rabbit hole of finding Z shell themes you like. There's all sorts of things here. I'm not really going to look too closely at it, but I'm going to go all the way to the bottom here and start doing my own stuff. So things that start with a hash are comments. So I'm going to just make a comment, aliases, and then underneath I'm going to make some aliases. So an alias is just a way of giving something that already exists another name. So let me copy paste both of these. And what we're doing here is that we want to make sure that we have this thing called Python 3 and pip3 install, and the reason they're called that is to distinguish between an older version of Python, which was known as Python 2. But we just want to be able to type Python. We just want to be able to type pip, and this is going to let us do that. So I'm going to hit save. I'm going to quit. And I could just completely quit this terminal window, but then another way without closing the terminal window to reread that .zshrc is I can say source .zshrc. So it's going to reread it. And now if I type in Python, it knows about Python. So let me exit. And if I typed which Python, it would say alias to Python 3, and then I could say which Python 3, and then it shows me the actual location of Python 3. And actually, I want to reopen that zshrc here. And the reason I want to do that is that if you remember, if I look in my home directory here, I do ls, we had this default environment, this default virtual environment called default. So I want to make sure that this file is going to run before anything else happens when I open the terminal. So I want to make sure I just set up a Python default virtual environment. So I can write something like this, and then that same command we did before, I can do it here. So I could say source, and then of course we want it to go to, from the home directory, we want it to go to default /bin/activate. But I actually can't write this exactly like I did in Bash, so we actually replace that tilde, which normally means your home directory with a bash script specific variable called $ all uppercase home. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to quit, and then I'll rerun that same thing I did before, where I say source zshrc, and now you'll see we have that default virtual environment set. And I'll close this and I'll reopen it to show. After a second, yep, we have it all set up. So that's all .zshrc is doing. That file is just going to run before your terminal ever runs in order to set up some basic things, and you can use it like that. Okay, so next we're going to install PostgreSQL. That's the database technology we're going to use. So instead we're going to do the same thing, but at 14, because that appears to be the one we want. And then I'll do brew services start PostgreSQL at 14. Okay, so now we have that running. And now I would hope I can type psql. There we go, great. Now it knows about this command called psql. So now I'm going to type psql postgres. And you'll see we're in Postgres. It knows about it. Psql is the command to start PostgreSQL. Postgres is just the name we're giving to the basic user. And then I want to exit out of this because I proved it works. So I'm just going to do /q, and this is just a peculiar thing. That's how you quit in Postgres for some reason. Okay, so we have Postgres working, and what is left? Let's do some VS Code extensions. So I would just want to make sure VS Code is working. And the way I'm going to do that, so I'm going to go to source here, and maybe I'll make a file called, I'll say code example.py. So we're going to open this file in Visual Studio Code, and maybe I'll write something like print. There we go. That's what I wanted. So I'm going to write, something like print hello and save it. And you'll see now that if I go, or rather, I could just do this. I could just do it in the default terminal. If I go into source there, I could just say, Python example.py, and it should run. But the main reason I wanted to do this is for this little pop-up here. It's saying, do you want to install the basic Python extensions from Microsoft? So we'll say yes. It'll bring us to the extensions folder, which is this square. Hover over this, it says extensions. So this is going to install some Python IntelliSense stuff. Might take a moment. So we just have to wait a moment for this to finish downloading. There we go. So what does that do for us? Well, you'll see it's doing some stuff now, discovering Python stuff. It knows about this default environment. And the main reason for this is that now, if I hover over a function, it tells me about that function. We call that IntelliSense, and it's a pretty useful feature. And we're good with this, so we'll close this. And now the next thing I want to do, just to see, let's create an example.js just to make sure that that works. And I can write console.log hello. Oops. And if I save this and I open the terminal, I can write something like this, and it should run, and it does run. And notice that if I hover over this, I think by default I should get some basic IntelliSense, but the IntelliSense for JavaScript tends to be a fair bit worse, so it might not be as useful. So I'll close that now. And what else do we have here? We have something called Live Share. So if I go into Visual Studio Code, let me just open it back up. Now I'm just manually going to go into these extensions and search for things. So the one we wanted you to see was Live Share. this is another thing made by Microsoft. It basically will make it easier down the line if you want to work with an instructor or a TA and allow them to just take over your screen and keyboard for a period of time. So it's a way of collaborating just like you do on like Google Docs or something, but in code. So that's a good one. And you're obviously free to download wherever you want in the extensions. So a lot of people would be fans of stuff like GitHub Copilot because that gives you like these AI hints. I would recommend not messing with the AI hint tools until you're in your group project phase, because it's going to basically, you don't want to be copy pasting code you don't understand, and that's going to make it really easy to do that. So really you want to spend a certain period of time just learning and trying to do it on your own. And then the AI tools might be very useful down the line, but don't rely on them too much too early. So there's another thing I'm going to look for here called live server. So I believe this is it, and I'm going to install it. Generally, you can look at how many times something's been downloaded and the stars, and that tells you if it's a good one or not. So 35 million people, 4.5 average, that's probably not like some kind of spam fake thing. Great, so it looked like it finished it, and now I'm going to close Visual Studio Code, and the reason for that is that I'm going to look here, and I'm going to make a new folder called website. And I'm going to go into that website. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to open it. I'm going to say code website, and it's a folder, so it's going to open the whole folder. And then now that we are in this folder, it's empty, so I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call that file index.html. And then I'm just going to start typing HTML, and you'll see you get these like autocomplete things. If I click one of them, it's going to give me, well, that's not the one I wanted, but if I click the second one, I guess HTML5, it's going to give me like a little basic HTML doc to start with. And then I'm just going to put an H1 in there like this and say hello world. And this is just to see this proof of concept for live server. So now I'm going to hit Command Shift P. That's going to open this command prompt again. And now I can start typing server. And what I want to do is live server open with live server. So the reason why I did the file is because it applies to the whole file. But here we are now, the whole folder. But here we see that we have essentially a working server, which is not so simple. We were able to serve up an HTML page just locally on our computer on a certain port, you can see here. But it's a good way to just test things out. So for example, if I added some CSS, I could say style.css, and maybe in there I would say something like for H1s they're going to have a background color of red. And you're not expected to know any of this yet, but just to show you that it really is a working thing. It's not showing you just your HTML page. I think that's what I want, and then I can do it relative to where I am. And I believe if I do this and I hit save, I go back to that file, yeah, you'll see it has a background of red. So it's a really easy way to test things out without having to code up a server in Python and Django or something. Cool. But this looks pretty good. We've covered everything, and I think we're ready to hang it up. So if you got this far, good, and you're ready to start the course.